Now, for webinars, I tend to speak a bit quicker than live presentations, and so I'm going to get right into this talk, which is about figuring out how to deal with taking content and delivering it effectively to different device types. And as part of this presentation, I do want to thank Adobe because they've been very helpful in supporting my efforts to put together these presentations and my time to do that. So please check out their information about their various products like RoboHelp and Captivate and FrameMaker. So I want to thank them for their support. I like to talk about this time as a major inflection point in the way that software is consumed, and therefore also the way that we provide user assistance and essentially any type of content within this new environment. And there was something that changed in 1989, which was very fundamental, and that's the last time I can remember there being an inflection point like we have right now. Maybe you can think about what might have happened around 1989 that changed. For those of you that are a lot younger than me, that would just be a historical reference, but I'm old, so I kind of lived that part of it. But if you had come up with the answer of the graphical user interface and or the mouse, that's exactly what I'm talking about, because before that it was a completely different user interface, and we had to completely change the way that we started writing information for our customers. And more interestingly than that, for a period of 2 or 3 years as we supported our software customers, we had to explain to them how to use the GUI and how to use the mouse for our products, in addition to the instructions about our products in general. And that went away after time, but it definitely was something that we had to do, because if you wanted people to use your product effectively, they needed to know what mouse interactions would do what in your product. And we're at a similar time right now that's exacerbated by the fact that we also have this huge device population that continues to grow, whereas we used to just have 2 or 3 different desktop sizes. Now we have many different desktop variants. We have the iPhone and the iPad with numerous models, Windows Phone, Android. Automobiles are having places to where we're having content presented to us as excuse me, as well as smart TV. Smart TVs being a place, being computers in and of themselves. Now, just to look at kind of a wild, extreme example of fragmentation, what you're looking at in this screen capture are all the different devices that support Android, the biggest of them being Samsung, but their Android has been so successful as an open source standard that the number of different device types is just somewhat amazing. And the question is then, how are we able to continue to support that as well as all those other device types? Interaction types right now have exploded as well. Just in the last 5 years, we've gone from supporting the keyboard and the mouse to then touch, voice, hand gestures. We have emerging interaction types like near-field communications. The stylus is still with us, and in some cases being used more than it had in the past. And that TV remote is still there, and as more and more apps are consumed in the living room, that may in fact be an interaction type that we have to consider in our documentation as well. And we have a bunch of platforms that have us presenting information in different ways that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. And the main question to us then is, how do we adjust our content to do this well? And it's certainly easy to push content onto different devices in a crummy way. But how do you do it with some professional grace? How do you do it efficiently? And there's a lot of issues that we have to deal with. Of course, there's screen dimensions and screen resolution, but different platforms have different ways of presenting user interface elements, even though the app may be doing the same thing on different platforms. Those platforms have proprietary components that we have to deal with. So there's a lot involved that, well, at least I didn't have to deal with 5 or 6 years ago even. So I'm going to talk about things in a couple of different ways. One of the areas I want to get into first is that of responsive design, which means different things to different people, but this is how this is what it means to me. And the main, to me, the main issue is being able to present information effectively for different device types. And so it's mainly a presentation issue. You deal with page layout, the size of elements, the way that you navigate through content. And you may have heard this term before. If not, Google it and you'll find all kinds of information about it. And that resources bullet point is an interesting article that you might want to read to learn about responsive design. And the single big idea, I think, in responsive design, especially related to small screen devices, is that a smartphone is not a smaller version of the desktop. And unfortunately, the way that a lot of our information that we develop ends up being published or delivered via small screen devices is just by pushing that information into a smaller space. And it's questionable whether or not that's actually effective. I have a more detailed discussion that gets into this that's on adobe.com. It's a free recording called Multiscreen Help Authoring, which gets more into technical issues more in a deeper way than I'm going to in this presentation. But this screenshot is kind of a summary of that, which is the idea that to me what I'm looking for with responsive design is being able to have a single source architecture where my content, say a given page, exists as a single page of content, and then I'm going to use open standard techniques to modify the presentation of that information for different device types. And so I'm not just shrinking the way that the desktop version looks, but I'm carefully identifying what components need to be visible in different device types, recognizing that for different device types, people have different needs. And so if I'm looking at something that's on a mobile device like a phone or a 7-inch tablet, it's not just that it's smaller screen real estate, but also that people are probably using that on the go, and they have different needs from that information, and they're going to want to consume that information in a different way. And so I'm going to make adjustments to my design for them to be able to read that information a little bit better way. Now, a scheme that I talk about in that presentation is the idea of identifying sort of buckets of devices which have common attributes, and use that as a way to manage the fact that there's just dozens of different device types coming out every month, if not hundreds of different device types overall. And so, for example, in this illustration, I've tried to reduce the world of possible output targets to 4 different categories from the top left going clockwise. I have my smartphones, then 7-inch tablet like Nexus 7 or the iPad mini, then down to the 10-inch, what I call a 10-inch tablet, which is the original or the larger iPad, and then there's the desktop category. And the idea is that these categories, once I have these categories, I'll design for these different categories, and as more devices emerge, they're probably going to fall into one of these 4 categories, and therefore I don't have to individually worry about those new devices. I just need to make sure that my designs for those 4 categories continue to be relevant and support the new devices that come out. And so as there's more and more devices appear, I'm able to essentially not really have to do much more work for that. It's all taken care of. So it takes a lot of upfront thought, but then on the back end, things become quite a bit easier. Just looking at how this scheme has worked over the past couple of years, well, there's been things that I've had to add in, or there's been situations where it's worked quite well. So, for example, for the 7-inch tablet size, when the iPad mini came out, that wasn't something that I designed for, but it ended up having the same attributes of the original Kindle Fire. When the Kindle Fire HD came out, which is a larger size tablet, that fit in well with that 10-inch category. The MacBook Pro was able to be supported by the desktop category. The iPhone 3G, the original iPhone, is one which didn't fit in because of its screen size. So you can also have ones that then end up not fitting in well. The way that this all works is by using a combination of HTML, cascading style sheets, and media query, where the media query is the dispatcher, and it identifies what type of device is requesting your information, and then attaching the appropriate style sheet to that information so that you can see it in the proper way. So, for example, it can identify that a device has a smaller screen type, therefore it's going to look for a style sheet that is set up for that smaller screen size that's on my server, and therefore my content is automatically going to be displayed using cascading style sheet appropriately for that device. So that was kind of a nickel tour of the scheme for the presentation side. Now, in terms of the content side, I refer to that as adaptive content, and this is another term that different people will define in different ways. And some people consider it to be like part of or directly related to responsive design, and I don't think of it that way. I think of it as looking at the different use cases that your content will have on different devices, and also the different interaction types. So I might go back to thinking about things in terms of this structure that you see here in responsive design, but now I'm thinking about, okay, so I have certain content, certain information types, certain blocks of content that I'm using, and now where are they appropriate? Is everything that somebody would be reading comfortably on the desktop still going to be useful for the person who's using the information walking through a train station? And obviously it doesn't have as much attention, the ability to pay attention to as much detail. And so I like to call this task analysis in context, which is it's kind of taken task analysis to a level that we hadn't had to do in technical communication in the same way before this. It's always been that we analyze a task that somebody would have to do with our software, and then we'd write a procedure about it. But now I think you need to think about that task specifically in terms of different environments that people might be in and what devices they're going to use. And so you may end up with different procedures for these different environments or different device types. And so single sourcing, again, is a big issue there. And kind of the big idea that I have here is that if you end up having to present information through a small screen window, that one of the first impulses with adaptive content is to just remove a lot of content. And you do need to remove a lot of content, but it's really important to think about what the content is that's still there, because if you just take out a lot of words, you might lose the value of that content. So in a way, your attention and consideration to individual words and phrases becomes really important with small screen devices. And this is something that's kind of hard to get resources for when a lot of times we're paid for cranking through volumes of information. Just check my time. Okay. Now, with respect to adaptive content, there are certain things that I've embraced over the past couple of years, and so I'll share those with you, and they're related to, we'll kind of go through the items that are on this bullet list. First of all is the idea of thinking about your language in terms of interaction types. And the verbs that we use, this is the time to have a discussion about what your scheme is going to be as you move forward, as to whether or not you want to consider employing a generic form for your procedure verbs, or whether you wanted to think about doing it in a custom orientation. So with the generic, you can see to change the widget settings, select preferences, scroll to view, move the unused items. So those are words that can apply to touch, voice, gesture, and so on. The other way to look at it is using language that's customized for different interaction types. So with the mouse, we have click, double click. With touch, tap, double tap. For gestures, like the Microsoft Connect language, we have hover and wave. With a remote control, you might have press left, press down. If it's voice, there will be certain commands for that. And the issue here is mainly that if you go with custom, you're going to have to recognize that the world is now more than click and double click, and it's more than click and tap. That potentially there's other device types that people may be using that you may not even have thought about from perspective of what you're doing within your organization. Just to show an example of how this is relevant, here's a couple of examples from Windows 8, two different help topics. And I imagine these were both written by Microsoft Teams, but there's some interesting differences here. So up in the top left example, to open PC settings, the command says swipe in from the right edge of the screen, tap settings, and then tap change PC settings. Clearly set up for touch interface, and then under it, in parens, if you're using a mouse, point to the upper right corner, blah, blah, blah. And so the point of view of the author of this topic was clearly that it's tapped first, and that we're also still going to then, after that, include information about the mouse. And compare that to the bottom right. Again, this is in the same operating system by Microsoft authors. You have a different point of view, which is step 1, tap or click. In the left pane, tap or click. So both of those are used. And the interesting thing that I see here is that Windows 8 supports a lot of different interaction types. So even the day that this came out, technically this doesn't support all the different interaction types that people might use with Windows 8, like voice or gesture. And so I'm not saying that you have to do things one way or another, but this is definitely the time to have the discussion about what's important to you. Do you care about things like this? Do you care that somebody might be working through your procedures and they see click this, click that, but they're using their finger for doing that? Do you know, how important is that to you? Some organizations, not much. To me, it's something that, as a professional, I wanted to try and make things as familiar to the user as possible. Now, I mentioned the need to get into single source processing to be able to support this, and if you do that, then you're able to based on your decisions about information types, start making adjustments for different device types automatically. And so you see an example of the same procedure that might be presented for a laptop user, the phone, or the TV, with slightly different presentations of that information. And that uses conditional text formatting within authoring tools. And most of our popular authoring tools provide that kind of support, but I think it's something that you definitely want to look for if you haven't been using that already. One of the things that I do when I'm starting projects now is to put together what I call a command language interaction table, where I think through what the different interaction types are and what my interaction verbs are going to be. This changes a little bit over time and for different platforms. But for the most part, it becomes a pretty standard reference that I go back to. But you can see that I have the generic verbs and then the equivalents for different interaction types, and then I can use that in a variable scheme in an authoring tool like RoboHelp. So for example, with RoboHelp, I can express a variable name in my procedure instead of using a typed version of the verb, and then it'll automatically make adjustments depending on what I choose when I'm outputting that information. And I talk about that scheme in another presentation on adobe.com that you could take a look at. There's also a few resources out there if you want to learn more about the names and the different types of touch interactions. For example, this is a great guide that was put together by Welinske. And then in my mobile user assistance book, I combined some information to kind of take a look at different touch commands on different devices. And for the most part, for smartphones, the same commands are used across devices, but there are some differences, and it's good to be aware of those, especially if you're specifically supporting a particular device. For example, Windows Phone has some different names for touch than iOS or Android. Is that important? Well, it depends. You have to think about what it means for your user. Is the user thinking of the term as drag, or are they thinking of it as pan? It's likely that drag may be the most prominent, but if someone's never used a smartphone except in Windows, or except for a Windows phone, then they're going to see that vocabulary for how to do things. So it's just another thing to be thinking about and exploring. And then there's new types of commands for different interaction types. So Connect has its own language. Windows 8 itself has all kinds of interactions that I think directly goes to my first slide about 1989 and having to explain how to use the mouse with an app. I think the swipes are really hard for anyone to understand or know about for the modern apps. So if you're making a modern app within Windows 8, I think you almost have to have some information presented to your customers about how to do the different touch interactions. And then apps that are appearing in automobiles tend to have a controlled vocabulary, like the Ford Sync. I've been working on a second edition of my book on mobile user assistance, and I'm kind of trying to come to some conclusions about the best way to be able to present help information with mobile apps. And it's really a situation where that ecosystem is so different from desktop apps that we have to think about it differently. And so I talk about the 4 C's, which are things that I try to think about when I'm creating content for smaller devices, for mobile devices. And first of all, that anything that I present is always in context with what the user is doing at the time, that it conforms to the way that the app looks and works, so that my help doesn't look markedly different from the other information that's presented in the app, that I use conditional programming whenever possible so that information can appear to the user when they need it and not before they need it, and also that information is written to be very concise. I just have this array of 6 different help panels from 6 different iPhone apps, and I like to throw this up there. I have a big gallery of mobile help screenshots on my website, and this is just like 6 random ones, but if you looked at the gallery, you kind of get the same impression. But I ask you what strikes you about this array of iPhone help, and to me the first thing that strikes me is how different they all look, but they're all done in a way that matches what the rest of the app looks like. So you're not going out to Safari, you're not getting bumped out to the mobile browser to look at something that looks like it's a squished down version of Microsoft Help. That's just not what people are looking for in today's apps. They're looking for something that's very integrated, very custom crafted for that particular app. And I think it's really important to think about that. People just don't seem to be willing to want to consume information that when they're dumped out to a separate browser. And the information that's presented there is, a lot of thought goes into what specifically needs to be presented when, and a lot of work goes into making sure that as much visual crafting is included as possible. Now on the for larger size tablets, there is a little bit more screen real estate for doing online help. However, if with tablet apps, it's kind of the same ecosystem as with phone apps, and people are just looking for a different presentation of information than what we had done in the past. And one of the areas that I think we can really contribute with is that of walkthroughs, and I'll mention that in a later slide, but I also wrote a post specifically about that on my website. In terms of developing content for phone-sized devices, which is anything from like an iPhone to a Note, once you're under a 7-inch device, I don't think that single sourcing that I talked about works very well. And I think you really have to consider that as a separate case and custom craft that content. And this kind of relates to our popular help authoring tools, in that the tools that many of us use for online help, they almost all now have an output target where they say they support doing mobile help. And the bottom line is that it's just crap. It just doesn't work. And if you think it's going to work, you can try it, but then I would ask you to try it with your customers and see how well it works, because in my experience, it doesn't at all. So using an output target where you're trying to take something from a desktop version to a small screen version, even with conditional text, I think just ends up being garbage. And I would strongly advise against doing that. I think you can do much better by crafting that content using HTML cascading style sheets to make that happen. Now, going back to the example I showed of that scheme earlier with the different output targets, just again building on the thing that I mentioned, that just that automation doesn't scale well for those small screens. Now, related to that is the table of contents. For a small screen device, table of contents are completely useless, and I've been involved in a lot of usability studies over the past couple of years where I've observed people working with table of contents in apps, and it's just a mess. People have no interest in that. So again, if your authoring tool is saying that you can get your desktop version into a small screen version, well, yeah, technically it can, but it's just garbage. I strongly recommend on not doing that, and to be thinking about a flat hierarchy where you're not trying to go more than one level. You don't have any depth to it. People are only going to consume information that's at that top level of links if you even have a table of contents. And similarly, if I already mentioned, if you're going to pushing somebody out to a browser, that's useless. You really need to embed your content directly into the app. And ideally, we're going to have some better editors available so that we can support those smaller size devices with HTML and CSS. And just a couple of examples of kind of a better way to do navigation. First of all, eBay, the top part is the desktop, the bottom part is the mobile, and they do have two levels of information there in the table of contents. However, that's the entire table of contents for the mobile app. The desktop one is much bigger, and so they figured out what information is most relevant to that particular device and kept it to one window full of information. So it's easily, people can easily work with it. On the right-hand side, the bigger one is for Amazon, is what you'd see on their desktop for the topics for shipping, delivery, and then what you see in the mobile app. And here is a situation where they recognize that people using the mobile app to find out about shipping and delivery probably have a smaller subset of issues that they're looking for when they're on the go using the app. So they had to make some decisions, but you can see that they eliminated a large number of the items that you would have found in the desktop table of contents. And so it's on us to do the research to think about what's different about that small screen mobile experience and what we can take to leave behind that was displayed on the desktop. I mentioned the walkthroughs on an earlier panel, and I think designing for a first-time user experience is a great way for us to get involved with mobile apps, because I think that users have a lot of questions up front, and if you can get those questions handled even for mobile apps, then that makes the experience much better as they work with the app. Even with simpler enterprise mobile apps, there's a lot of questions up front, and if you can do some type of information right then, that really pays off. And it's definitely an edge case, so you want to come up with creative ways, maybe programmatically revealing information, recognizing when people start working with it, or offer a tutorial when they first start working with the app. And then later on, as you add in advanced features or updates or upgrades, again, programmatically, you might want to reveal that there might be features that they can take advantage of. And so, you're adding information as hints and tips as people go along, instead of forcing people to go into a help menu and scroll around trying to find the relevant content. And then finally, I want to talk about voice, because, well, for 20-some years I've been saying if we ever get good voice control with our devices, then we'll be able to have an easier way to present help information to our customers. We're still not here yet. We're getting kind of close. The problem is that even though a lot of devices now allow you to talk to the device, it's in a very controlled way. And so for the iPhone and for Android, so far it's more been for the apps the main apps that are included with the operating system. And what we need is some kind of API so that we can develop recognition for when people ask for help about our specific product, and then be able to give them the right information. And I wrote an article related to this on my website, so you might want to check that out. Well, that kind of brings me to the end of the things that I wanted to talk about, and it's just a summary of things that I'd mentioned. I want to just say now that if this is a good opportunity to ask me some questions. If you want to type it into chat, I can keep an eye on that. And I want to also mention the event that we have coming up in Newport, Rhode Island in October. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's a really interesting place to visit if you haven't been there, with all the big mansions that you can take a tour of. And it's a really interesting town. We're trying to do it at at an affordable price, and if you register by next Tuesday, there's an additional discount that'll make it then a $695 price for the 2 days of the conference, which have a lot of great networking and interesting sessions, I think. So definitely consider that and talk about it with your colleagues. I much appreciate anything you can do to get out the word about that. And then I have some links to the resource directory on my website, my blog, and then I'm always doing courses and presentations, a number of which are free, like this one. Well, I guess this might not have been completely free, but anyway, you can check that out to see what things I have going on. I'm just looking to see, I haven't seen anybody put anything in yet for does anybody have any other questions? All right, well, let's see. There's a question from Adam Evans. Is it okay to use screenshots in mobile help? Well, the main thing is it comes down to your screen real estate. And let me just jump back to that one slide where I was talking about things. And you can see that in some of these examples, that screenshots, well, that there's representations of the user interface in a few of those, a couple of those. And so it's just all about doing it appropriately for that size. If you're doing a large screenshot, obviously somebody might misinterpret that for the user interface of the device itself. So you probably want to be much more careful about that. So you can see in the one for the tutorial for the game, it's showing the device being shaking the device, and then you can see another screen capture in the One Safe Getting Started panel. So it's just a matter of being appropriate to the screen size and doing that. Let's see, another question from Am. Do you think there's a best approach to tablet help? For example, would you recommend an overlay versus a help icon with fully documented help? Well, the overlay example is really best used for helping people identify where to touch on the user interface, and it's something that you'll often use first time people start up an app. With some apps, it's also connected to the help button, and it's used a lot in devices where it may not, or in apps where it may not be clear where to press, where to tap. It's not as effective for more detailed procedure information. And even with a tablet, the way that I would think about it is, first of all, recognize what's going on the screen that the person is working with. And then definitely you want to have any help that you provide be directly related to that screen. And if you have room in the tab bar for a help icon or something like that, then that would be connected directly to a topic that's appropriate for that page of information. Let's see. Sherry Noble asks a question. Do you write the content once for all devices, even if it's the abbreviated writing style? for most of my projects, it's been going from the desktop to then also supporting smaller screen devices. And so it's been about editing and reducing. However, that down at that smallest level, the smartphone level, I've completely thrown out all the information and just gone at it from scratch. However, Luke Welinske wrote a book last year called Mobile First, and his idea about websites in general was that you design for the small use case first, and then you build out from that. For a lot of organizations, they already have the desktop version. But in terms of documentation, I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. The idea that if you now know that you're supporting all those devices, that maybe you totally rethink your documentation set, start with the small screen devices, and then work up as appropriate for the different devices and the amount of screen real estate. And it's something I'm thinking about, and hopefully I'll be able to try that out on a project sometime soon. Let's see. Actually, I'm just looking at the time right now, and I think it's probably a good time to wrap things up. Let's see, Adam asked about issues with localization, so maybe I could take that one offline. In fact, for any of you, if you want to send me a question at joe@welinske.com, I'd be happy to to answer your question for you, and you can just do that through email. Other than that, I think I'll just end things at this point, and thank you for participating in this. Again, thank Adobe, and hope to see you at future events, and hope to see you in person at a chapter meeting or something like that. So thanks a lot.